there's so much more to do. I was thinking if you were growing up 100 years ago, think of what options a child had compared to the options they have today. There's so much competition for their attention, and it starts so early. I mean, I'm shocked when I see, three-year-olds doing video games, 5-year-olds on cell phones. There's less time for learning, and learning has become so much more dull to kids who have immediate gratification on machines. One of the best things we did during my time as governor, we invested $220 million to put laptops in every core curriculum classroom in high school. The teachers got smart boards, and the kids learned right on the computer. 4 kids at a table, they worked out problems that the teacher gave them on the smart board. The kids were on fire because it was something that they do every day, and it was exciting to them and challenging to them. So I think there are a number of causes, and I probably just touched on a few.
Well, we'll come back to that. Vicki Kennedy, you said something when you dedicated the EMK Institute that I thought was absolutely astounding, that 1/3 of graduating high school seniors did not know there are 3 branches of government.
This is Annenberg numbers. I mean, it's extraordinary to me how little civic knowledge there is in the country. And I think another part of that is that, a third of them can't even name one branch of government. And it goes to what Governor Rendell was just saying. I think people are so occupied doing other things. But I think even in the time when we did have regular civics education, it was always an add-on. It was something that you did maybe in the 5th grade or something that you did in some particular grade. It wasn't integrated into everything or into every part of a curriculum. And it's just something that was too easy to slip by. And it was something that people memorized and then went on with. And so I think the goal, at least from what we're doing at the Kennedy Institute, is to try to make it a relevant part of people's lives so that when they're looking out in the world, they see why it matters.
I know Governor Graham of Florida is here, and let's talk about the funding of schools. Is that part of the problem? Are school districts in Pennsylvania and across the country stretched so much that they don't have the resources to teach the basics?
Well, I think that's true. One of my proudest accomplishments was in all 8 years I was governor, including the 2 years in the teeth of the recession, we increased education funding every single year. But on the other hand, I never got a budget on time because I had to fight with mostly Republicans, but some conservative Democrats on how to pay for education funding. That is a significant problem. But it's also more than that because there are attempts at teaching civics, but as Vicki will say, because I've heard her say it backstage, we taught it in a very dull, plodding way. It wasn't experiential. Professor Parker today talked about political simulation. The way kids want to learn today is to experience things, and it's so important. And by the way, the Annenberg statistics that Vicki quoted, my favorite statistic is 1 out of 10 kids think that the right to own a pet is guaranteed by the Bill of Rights.
You mean it's not? Vicki Kennedy, let's go back to one of your husband's legacy. He worked with Republicans to pass the Leave No Child Behind legislation. The good news is it required testing to make sure students reached benchmarks. The bad news is it required testing to make sure students reached benchmarks. So what Governor Rendell said, are we teaching students to test well and not to learn?
Well, isn't that the question? I mean, I think he certainly didn't expect that people would be teaching to this test, but he believed that we should have evaluations and that you wanted to make sure that students were learning. So there's always that debate and that push-pull.
And I think if Ted could have designed it, the test would have been one part of the overall school score. Attendance rates, graduation rates, they would have all factored into what score a high school got.
And I know this is a personal issue for you, Mrs. Kennedy, because your husband lived it with your own nieces and nephews.
It's okay, by the way, for you to call me Vicki. Thank you.
So, Vicki.
Thank you. I feel so much better now.
But you told the story backstage, and I'll share it with the audience, about what it was like to travel with your husband and experience history.
So my husband believed very much in history and in history education, and every year we'd have a family history trip. And I was telling the governor that we went to Philadelphia and we went through the Constitution Center and we had that history trip. We went to battlefields all over. We did our Massachusetts history trips, but I can remember, this I didn't tell you, but I can remember being at a Civil War battlefield, and this was very vivid for me. We were with historians and the wonderful Park Service, and they were just fantastic. We're explaining about the northern soldiers and the southern soldiers and how they came around this mountain and what happened. And we were with the wonderful historian Shelby Foote, and Shelby Foote said, the Southern soldiers had no shoes. Their canteens were empty. And he proceeded to paint a picture. And the overwhelming sense that I got as I looked at the faces of our young nieces and nephews was that history had just come alive for them. It wasn't just a statistic anymore. It was that they felt they were there in the middle of it. And that is really the goal, I think, in teaching and experiencing history, is to make it come alive. And in that way, you become engaged.
Well, let me take that one step further. This is an impossible question to answer, but Governor Rendell, if you could take students to one location to better understand the founding principles of our democracy and the words that shaped our country, where would you take them?
To Independence National Park in Philadelphia. If Philadelphia was fogged in, we could detour to Boston.
Vicki?
I would take them to the location of Massachusetts.
Shocking. So let's talk about solutions. Governor, how do we get back on track?
Well, it's interesting. I heard most of the morning sessions, including obviously the one that Judge Rendell moderated. And I think they were all good and all the programs sounded like they were beneficial. But I think many of the programs missed the mark. When I was governor, the judge, because she was a judge, couldn't do advocacy for legislation. She couldn't raise money for causes. So she picked one thing as her sort of portfolio, and that was civics education. And we sent her around to high schools all around the state. And she even developed with the Department of Education a civics test to be given before graduations. So she did some good, but she reported to me that by the time kids get to 17 or 18 years, if they're not imbued with a interest or an enthusiasm for civics, it's way too late. And a lot of the programs that we fund, in my opinion, are way too late. So when we decided, when we left office, to form the Rendell Center, we targeted elementary schools. And I don't know how many of you heard the judge this morning, but I'll just give you an example of one of the programs that she actually runs out of the center. And that's a mock trial to demonstrate to kids the judiciary and how our judicial system works. And they make the kids read a book. So I'll give you the easiest example. They make the kids read the story of Goldilocks. And then Goldilocks is put on trial in the school. And the kids are given roles. They're witnesses, they're lawyers, they're jurors, and they have to decide the fate of Goldilocks. And then after that, they go down to federal court, where either a federal district court or a court of appeals judge goes through the entire procedure again. And the kids are absolutely cooking with enthusiasm. It's unbelievable. And I knew that when I was mayor. One of my deputy chiefs of staff asked me to teach his daughter's third grade class in April. And the reason he wanted me to come was that the teacher, on her own volition, had organized the class into a town. There were 23 kids, and she had councilmen, she had the mayor, she had the solicitor, she had the police chief, the fire chief, the public works chief, and all they did one day a week, they solved problems. And by the time I got there, the kids would have had me stay there for 5 hours and answer their questions. Kids will respond if you treat them like adults and you give them serious topics and you tell them it's important. They will respond with tremendous enthusiasm. So we focus all of our attention on the kids. So we had a mayoral primary in 2015, 5 Democratic candidates. We had a debate based on questions that the kids sent in. We brought the kids who had the winning questions into the auditorium. They asked the questions to the candidates, and we closed-circuited that to every elementary school and every middle school in the Philadelphia School District. Great stuff, and the kids were so into it. I think if you can get that enthusiasm going when kids are 6, 7, 8, they want to become senators. One kid in one school referred to himself as the senator. They're really, and we do another thing called a Citizenship Challenge. We give them questions. So this year's question is term limits. But we had a question, should the Constitution be changed to allow naturalized citizens to run for president? And 450 schools responded. Some of them took one side, the others took the other side, and then we picked the best 10. They come into the Constitution Center, and the judge and I and Mr. Rosen, who's the NCC's director, we sit as panelists, and they can use audio visual. And the school that won that year made a great presentation. They took the tougher side of the issue, saying, no, the Constitution shouldn't be changed. They looked up some of the records of the debate that the founders had about that particular provision of the Constitution. And they closed their presentation on the video playing Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA.
That's fantastic.
Unbelievable enthusiasm.
So after you visit the Rendell Center and head up to Boston and go to the ENK Institute, I mean, it is surreal when you walk into that Senate chamber because you are in the Senate chamber. So you made the reference to Senator. For students who walk in, they're not John or Mary, they're Senator so-and-so.
That's right. So at the Kennedy Institute in Boston, we have a totally interactive experience. All of the exhibits on the wall are projected, they're interactive, you learn about the Senate, but we use the Senate as a way to get into understanding how the government works. And the kind of central place is the actual Senate chamber, and we have a full-scale replica of the Senate chamber. And every visitor to the Institute has a chance to cast a vote. And we have a vote of the day, an issue of the day, and we advertise what it is. For students, teachers get to book in advance, and we have a more extensive program which we call Simulated Senate. And we have it booked for every school day, I think, for the rest of the school year already. And they come in and they debate over a 2 or 2.5 hour period a piece of legislation. They have to go into committee. It's a facilitated discussion. They have to negotiate, compromise, learn how you work through the difficulty of getting legislation passed, and it culminates in an actual vote. They have either a new issue, a current issue, they vote on immigration or the Farm Bill or different things like that, or they'll take an historic piece of legislation like the Compromise of 1850, which is, and they're interesting and complex issues surrounding that. For the youngest students, and I couldn't agree more with the governor that we believe you've got to get them at the youngest ages so that they get interested and want to be involved. We are about to have our second kid convention. This is something that we started last year before the election, where we had children ages, I believe it's 5 to 11 is the age, and we wanted them to understand what it is to vote. And this is about getting involved in knowing why it's important to vote. And they come in and we explain the voting process to them, that somebody runs because they are advocating a certain position and they get elected by people. And then they get to talk about what issues they're interested in. And these issues could be, I want chocolate chip cookies for everyone, or whatever their issues are. And they have a platform, but they're kid issues. And then they make speeches, and then they get votes for their issues. And it is such an exciting and dynamic process, and it was a huge success. They've got banners, they've got signs, they have their votes, but they're learning about the system. And we're expecting another big turnout for our kid convention, our second annual kid convention that's coming up.
Governor, you've been in politics for how many years?
I first ran for office in 76, so that would be 41 years.
So we are at the midpoint between the White House and Capitol Hill. Does today's political discourse on both sides of the aisle contribute to the inability or complacency of young people today to really understand their politics? I'm being diplomatic.
Yeah, no, in general, I would say yes. The fact that nothing seems to get done, the fact that there's so much acrimony between the two sides. This year has had a strange effect. I think kids are more interested in it because it's become so controversial, so much covered in the late night comedy shows or the comedy shows they watch. But generally, yes, it's a turnoff. What goes on here is a turnoff. And it's not just the polarization. It's the fact that nobody seems to have any courage. President Kennedy wrote Profiles in Courage. I would tell you that in the last couple of decades, you couldn't fill up a 270-page book with individuals who showed political courage. Everyone seems to, the first thing that's on everybody's mind is how we win the next election. Like Nancy Pelosi has been besieged with negative tweets because she helped President Trump get something passed, which the country desperately needed. Desperately needed. It's horrible that that's the thought. And then people say, well, look at your party, look at them all doing that. I said, well, yeah, our party, they shouldn't be doing that, but didn't your guys get together on Inauguration Day in 2009 and vow that President Obama would be a one-term president? Is that good for the American people? I mean, we've got to get things done. Infrastructure, tax reform, education, healthcare. You can't put them on hold for the next 4 years. We have an obligation as Democrats to try to get something done the best we can. You know, it's ironic that President Trump's theme song during the campaign was "You Can't Always Get What You Want" by the Rolling Stones. Anybody know the second verse of that? But if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. And that's the truth. But because nothing gets done, it is a turnoff, not just for kids, it's a turnoff for adults.
Do you see that changing, Vicki?
I hope so. I mean, I'm the eternal optimist, but I don't think it changes unless people know what it's supposed to be. And there has to be, we can teach all we want, which is I'm passionate about, and everyone who goes through the Institute and goes through our programs, they say, oh, that's what regular order is. Oh, that's how legislation passes. I get it, because they're experiencing it and they do it. And I hope they're going to hold their senators and representatives accountable if they're roadblocks and if they're not doing it. But I think we have to have, they have to have an experience of seeing something that actually works. You know, it wasn't so long ago that it did work. I mean, we're not talking ancient history. You know, I was thinking back, 2009, in the spring of 2009, the Serve America Act passed. It was incredibly bipartisan. This is where Americans joined together to give back for the good of their country. Republicans and Democrats joined together because they believed in service. That's 2009. And now people on our side of the aisle are vilifying Nancy Pelosi.
Sure.
Because she dared to, talk to the President of the United States? So we just have to get back to, I think, leadership at the highest levels. I don't think it's just the President who has a bully pulpit. I think members of the House and the Senate have a bully pulpit too. And I think they need to be role models. And I think we can all work, which I'm passionate about and committed to working as hard as we can. But I think we need leadership from the top as well.
And I would agree with that. I'll give one example. Ted believed in education more than education and healthcare were the two things that drove him. And he stood with President Bush to endorse No Child Left Behind. Had he not been there, it wouldn't have gotten the votes because the Democrats controlled the Congress at that time. It never would have passed. It simply wouldn't have passed. And I'm sure there were some parts of our base that vilified Ted Kennedy. But Ted Kennedy didn't care. Right. He had the courage to do exactly what he believed was right for the country. And until we get leaders like that, leaders lead. Leaders lead. People follow when leaders lead, particularly if they're persuasive and can make the case. But if no one's willing to get out there and put their rear end on the line, then the situation's going to stay where it is. But if a couple of people got up there and said, I thought after they shot at the softball practice, they shot the Republican, one of the Republican leaders.
Steve Scalise.
I thought there was an opportunity for the congressional leaders of both parties to say, damn it, that's enough. we're going to work together and pass stuff. We'll send it to the president, hopefully he'll sign it. But we're going to work together and get stuff done. And that means compromising. So Democrats will have a tax reform bill. Most of the benefits will go to the middle class, but you're going to have to give some of the benefits to the top 2% because we believe that's how you drive the economy. You don't, but you're going to have to vote for that. And Republicans, you're going to have to vote for a gas tax because if you're giving the middle class a $3,000 tax cut, a 10-cent a gallon gas tax would cost the average driver $140. They're still $28 to $160 ahead. You don't like voting for revenue, but you're going to have to do it. Somebody's got to lead. And the leadership, Vicki's right, it can't just be the president. It can't just be the president. It's got to come from congressional leaders. It's got to come from governors. By the way, I give the Republican governors who, and not to get into a partisan issue, but the Republican governors who campaigned against the Republican health care replacement bills, who've written letters to the senators and congressmen, I give them tremendous high marks because it can't be easy. It's going to enrage the Trump base in their states, but they did it because they believed that there would be people in their states irretrievably hurt. But leaders lead, but Vicki's also right. It's for our citizens, it's got to start at the beginning. Just think, everyone decries dark money and all the big money that's in politics. If we voted 75, 80% in every congressional and presidential election, dark money wouldn't mean a thing.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that if you go to the C-SPAN website, we have a great C-SPAN in the Classroom tool for teachers if you want to teach civics. But let me go back. Do either of you remember a teacher that made a difference in your lives in terms of understanding the foundation of our government? Elementary, secondary, high school?
No.
No.
No, because our teachers in those days took the textbook and read off the textbook in class. And it was
So it wasn't interesting.
It wasn't interesting. I got my interest in politics from my dad, who never was involved in politics, but who believed that the Democratic Party was the best vehicle for ordinary people, who believed that FDR saved the country. I was tacking up Adlai Stevenson stickers when I was 8 years old with my dad. And I said in my book, the only time I saw my dad cry, and he died when I was 14, was the night in '52 that we heard on the radio that Stevenson had lost. Only time I saw him cry.
How about you? Anyone shape your views?
I had teachers who inspired me to learn, but I would say that my interest in government and politics came from my family. My earliest political memory is I was 6 years old, and I was, so now you'll know exactly how old I am. I was listening to the radio and writing down the returns for President Kennedy's election in 1960.
So let me go back. If there are questions from the audience, I think we have a mic. We can get a couple of questions. But let me go back to the fundamental issue that if people view our politics as broken, how can you get them interested, especially at the age of 8, 9, 10 years old?
By telling them you can fix it. And they can. And they can. If we produce the next generation of young people vitally interested in politics and government, they would blow us all away. I mean, if millennials voted at the same percentage that over 65-year-old voters vote, they would control virtually every election. They could do anything they want. I tell the kids today that a bunch of college kids put on jackets and ties and nice dresses and went up to New Hampshire and campaigned against Lyndon Johnson because they wanted to end the Vietnam War. And they did. They did.
One of the things, and I went to your website at the MK Institute, you're focusing on the League of Nations debate, or you talk about the civil rights debate. We've had heated debate and political discourse in this country, and your husband is emblematic of some hot issues that he dealt with in his 40 years in the Senate, 48 years in the Senate. And yet at the end of the day, Democrats and Republicans could set aside their differences and still have a civil conversation and often be friends. Have we lost that art today?
Well, I think right now it's very frayed, and I think that there are a lot of reasons for it. And when my husband first went to the Senate, the Democratic Party itself had a range of different beliefs. And a lot of times the place to make the common cause was on the other side. He understood that you couldn't have legislation that passed unless you worked with the other side. And the senators were there 5 days a week. There wasn't the money chase. Now it's much shorter work weeks. Families don't know each other. Spouses are encouraged not to stay in town. Washington is a bad place. People are told in some areas government is a bad thing. I don't know why you run for office if you think what you're running for is a bad thing. It doesn't make sense to me. But there's not the same necessarily, you don't know people in the same kind of way. So I think when you don't have those personal relationships necessarily, I think there's a breakdown. And I think that's one of the factors.
Governor Rendell, you're in an elementary school. Day one, you have the ability to teach first, second, or third graders civics. What would you teach them? How would you start?
I would start with the First Amendment. And I'd go over all the 6 rights guaranteed by the First Amendment and tell them this is why this is such a special place. Other countries have democracies and some degree of freedom and liberty, but none are like ours.
So you get them excited.
Excited about what we have and their responsibility to keep it. I mean, remember what Ben Franklin told that lady when she asked what type of government we have. By the way, Ben Franklin grew up in Boston, but he had the good sense to relocate to Philadelphia.
Here we go again.
Ben Franklin, you remember the great quote?
Yes, yes.
Give it to him, Vic.
So what he said, the woman asked him as he was leaving the Constitutional Convention, she said, Dr. Franklin, what do we have, a monarchy or a republic? And he said, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. And I mean, I think that's such a perfect quote because you have to know what it is if you're going to keep it. And that's what civic education is all about, right? It's knowing what it is. But I think the other wonderful thing about Ben Franklin is he believed that, he also said, the greatest question you can ask in the world is what good can I do in it? And so part of that civic education was civic engagement. And so he believed in the volunteer fire department, the postal service. I mean, he was always about giving back. And so to me, civic education and service are something that go hand in hand because then you've got a vested interest in your government and and understanding it better. And if you look at young people, and this is my optimism, and if you look at young people now, the service is high. They give back. They want to be a part of a solution to problems. And it just seems to me that is just one side of the coin, that if we can just encourage more on the voting, and because we desperately need an understanding of our government and voting participation, because that's the future of our country.
And the other part of the equation is not just the role of teachers, but the role of parents. And your first title is mom. You've raised 2 incredible kids who are giving back. So what do parents need to do? What advice would you give them?
I mean, I think it's encouraging, showing that you're participating. I believe in encouraging service, but also in civic engagement, talking about the issues. It's the way we raised our children, and showing them that you vote. I just voted in the mayoral primary yesterday in my office because I was an absentee because I can't be in Boston on Tuesday for the primary. But it's letting them know that you're always voting and participating and being engaged. And at a young age, I took my children to polling places. They saw how important it was to vote. Let them participate in political activities. We actually just did a poll in the spring at the Kennedy Institute that I found to be very interesting. It's the first time we asked this question. We'll see what it is next year when we ask the question again. We asked how involved, and this was a nationwide poll, how involved people have been in the political process in the preceding 3 months. And the answer was more than 50% of the people had been involved in the political process in the preceding 3 months by either writing to their members of Congress, volunteering in a campaign, participating in a march. It was extraordinary. Now, I do believe that was unique to the circumstances and the time. But it will be interesting to see how much that level of participation continues.
We want to keep on schedule, so in our remaining minute or two, let me conclude with this question. And Governor Rendell, I'll begin with you. Tell us what your institute is doing, how is it making a difference, and what advice would you give this audience?
Well, my only problem with the Rendell Center is scale. We operate on $330,000 a year. We touch schools in the 5-county area. We're starting to bring some Pittsburgh schools in. Our Summer Teachers Institute gets teachers from all 50 states. They come, if you think teachers aren't interested in changing things, teachers at their own expense come to Philadelphia, some from Washington, we've had one from Hawaii. We give them room and board for the 10 days, but they come at their own expense to learn better ways and best practices to get through to kids and to learn more about the system themselves, particularly the judiciary. Not many people know about how the judiciary operates. The Electoral College, how do they teach the kids about why did Mrs. Clinton lose when she got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump? And they explain the Electoral College, what it was intended to do by the framers. And then they get the kids involved in, well, do you think it should be changed? And if so, what would you do? And it gets the kids thinking. So, yeah, I think that, by the way, whoever organized this is great. And to have all of you here, it's terrific. And for those folks who do make funding decisions, and I'm not just saying this because the Rendell Center does it, but start young, aim young. If you have a grandson or a granddaughter and they're 5, 6 years old, ask them about something about current events and explain it to them and get their opinion. You'd be surprised, shocked at how interested they would be to be asked their opinion on something. And that's the place to start. That's the place to start. If we do it then, at that level, I think we've got a chance to change an awful lot.
Vicki?
Well, we're just, I'm so impressed with what you're doing there. We're just continuing to try to inspire young people to be involved civically, to understand more about the workings of the Senate, hopefully to run for office. And every time I hear a young person say that they are now thinking about running for office, I think that's fantastic because we need more good people to be there. We're hoping that we're inspiring active citizens. And I think it's also about scale. You know, it's having more and more people involved in it. But we're excited about what we're doing, about the reaction to what we're doing, about the involvement of these students, and we'd like to just be able to have more. We're working right now on being able to take some of the simulated Senate programs and have them in classrooms outside of the actual Senate chamber. So we're moving on.
Before we close, can I ask the audience one quick question? How do you think the majority of kids vote on Goldilocks? How many think they find Goldilocks guilty? How many think they could quit Goldilocks? I would have thought they would have universally acquit Goldilocks just because she's such a sympathetic character. But they learned the system so well that they say, well, the judge said this is what theft is, and she committed theft. The majority of the kids convict Goldilocks.
Did you want to weigh in on that?
No, I'm definitely not. No, I'm definitely not. No.
You can tell I'm not running ever again.
On that note, we thank the governor of Pennsylvania. We thank Vicki Kennedy. Appreciate your time.